you've started something, right? You've begun something that can go from them thinking it through, thinking about it, to you actually sharing with them the truth about what you know about how socialism is bad, and there are other options for us. So we started off with, if you're just tuning in, socialism being based on a materialistic worldview that is antithetical to a country such as our own, where we believe, we're founded on Judeo-Christian values. Whether or not you believe that is your own thing, but it doesn't change what the founders brought to us or gave to us, which is a constitution that's fit only for a moral and religious population. Check it out for yourself. It's in the documents. Now, the second reason why socialism is antithetical to Christianity is socialism punishes virtue. Socialists want to distribute wealth to individuals according to their need, regardless of whether or not they've earned it. There is something virtuous about earning your own way. It doesn't mean that you can't be poor and be a virtuous person. It doesn't mean that a person who has money or has earned money is automatically virtuous. But what it does mean is that someone has earned the money and someone else has not. And so just the fact of not having doesn't mean that you have the right to take from someone who has earned. Now, I know there's a lot of conversation that can go around about whether or not someone has earned something if they were given it, say, by their parents, or it was passed on to them. But the fact is, what you're doing when you say we need socialism is you're saying, I got to take money from people who have it, regardless of how they've gotten it. I have the right to take it and give it to people who don't have it. And the only thing that gives me that right is I've gotten together with a few million other people who believe as I do. And I'm going to take from people who do have, and I'm going to give it to people who don't. And it's my prerogative to make that decision. Well, you're way out in left field by the time you get there anyway. Now, Karl Marx said, because we got to go back to the founders of socialism and what they said to understand what they're trying to put forward. Quote, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, end quote. But when institutions provide aid, they run the risk of removing God-designed rewards and consequences and replacing them with arbitrary, feeling-based, dictates. The government can punish people who are industrious and work hard and save and make right choices by making them pay for those who do not. They can reward those who aren't industrious by giving them the fruits of another man's labor. This is precisely what socialism does. Karl Marx mooched off of others his whole life and failed to provide for his own wife and children. Yet we take his doctrine as the law. People, namely millennials and the children that we have in public schools right now, are being taught to revere the ideas of a man who never took care of his own family. That should be something that we should be against. Aristotle once noted that men start revolutionary changes for reasons connected to their private lives. But the Bible teaches that aid should be tied to responsibility, and anyone who refuses to work should be refused aid. So the Bible doesn't say you should starve because you're poor. It doesn't say if you haven't worked and you find yourself poor that you shouldn't be helped. It says if you want to eat, you should work. So it means that even when people are being given aid, if they're able-bodied enough, if they're not completely disabled, they should be able to work to contribute to the aid that they're receiving. In other words, they're just not sitting back and getting a handout. Now, mention this to any socialist and they'll say, no, people should be able to get something for free if they're poor. No, that's not biblical. So 2 Thessalonians 3:10 says, the one who is unwilling to work shall not eat. No one should be given aid whose family can provide for him. In fact, the Apostle Paul said that a man who fails to provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever. Going on, the church also required widows receiving aid to have a reputation of good works. In other words, they weren't sitting at home polishing their nails and waiting for someone to deliver food and aid to them. They were out working in the community. They were widowed. They were poor, but they had a reputation for being helpful. In other words, so someone who's out in the field managing their work, but their children need to be cared for, I can do that. I'm a widow, and in exchange for doing that, I get to have dinner there. You see how that works? It takes the whole government out of the equation because people who need assistance know that they have to do something in order to get it. So people who don't really need the assistance will go out and get a job rather than be dependent on someone else's charity, because they won't want to be dependent upon charity because they don't need it. See how quickly the number of people who are on aid dissipates when it becomes something that has accountability attached to it? So even in dispensing aid, the church rewards virtue and discourages vice. Socialism does exactly the opposite of that. Now, number 3, the reason why socialism doesn't work with Christianity is socialism endorses stealing. Barack Obama once defended his socialist policies to a little girl by saying, we've got to make sure that people who have more money help the people who have less money. If you had a whole pizza and your friend had no pizza, would you give him or her a slice? Well, to a child, and the analogy is pizza, not your whole paycheck, sounds pretty, philanthropic, doesn't it? So doesn't that sound sweet? Well, it sounds Christian. And what Christian wouldn't endorse sharing abundance with someone who has nothing? But see, here's the thing. Christians already do that. That's a whole nother show. The philanthropic work of Christians. The things that Christians do, unbeknownst to anyone else, they do it under, cover of darkness and keeping it known only to themselves, what they're doing to help other people, because they're mandated to do so by the word of God, and they do it in secret because they want to be rewarded openly in heaven, as opposed to the opposite. So you can put it another way. Barack Obama says the government should basically take a piece of pie from one person and give it to another person who doesn't have any pie. Or if you have 3 cars and your neighbor has no cars, the government has a right to take one of them and give it to your neighbor. Or take all of them but one, because every person only needs 1 car. Never mind the fact that maybe you, first of all, worked and paid off that first car. You bought that car used because you knew you couldn't afford a new one. You worked and you paid it off. While you were working to pay that car off, you saved and you invested. And then when that car was paid off, you bought another one, this one for, your spouse. And then you worked and paid that car off. And then you had a little money that you'd been saving, and you used that to buy a used car for one of your kids. So now you have 3 cars. Barack Obama would say you don't need them. Now, Barack Obama would never say he doesn't need his 5 homes. Remember, he owns 5 mansions. But he would say, you, John Q. Public, don't deserve your cars. Do you see the difference there? Do you see how that is a total bastardization of what the Constitution, the Bible, and everything that has anything to do with responsibility says about how you're to treat people when they've worked and planned and earned and saved to accomplish something. He loves to say you didn't build that, but we don't see anybody taking anything from him with his law degrees and his undergraduate degrees and all of the money that they've earned from speaking engagements and their books and everything else. I don't know how they made all that money, $40 million, $40 to $133 million. No one's taking anything from them, but they advocate for you to have things taken from you. Take things from you, give it to people who haven't earned it, people who aren't related to you, who don't know you, and they get to make those arbitrary decisions with what you've earned because they're better than we all are. They have better ideas. They're just better, right? And we know that's garbage. So socialists also don't believe in private property. Christian socialists will assert that the Bible doesn't believe in private property, but that is an absolute garbage mode thinking. It's not true. If you read the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament unequivocally affirm private property, and they say in God's word over and over and over again, you're told not to steal. The 8th commandment of the 10 commandments is that you do not steal. You can't steal something that's public property. So if property has no ownership, then how can you steal? So the very idea that the Bible says do not steal indicates that people can own private property with which other people can be envious and want to take and steal from them. We can't steward our money as the Bible commands us to by giving the first tenth to the Lord if the government owns all of our money, right? Because if the government was the owner of everything, then the Bible would say the government should give the first tenth of everything that's owned to God. But it doesn't say that. It says you should do it. And if you don't do it, the consequences fall to you, not to the government or to me. Same for me. Everyone has their own personal responsibility and accountability for following what God's word tells us to do. So, for an economic and political system to be Christian, it must protect private ownership and allow individuals the freedom to allocate their resources according to their conscience, knowing that they'll be held accountable at the judgment seat and that no one else will be forced to be held accountable for what they've done. Pretty interesting, right? So then, number 4, socialism encourages envy and class warfare. Socialists demonize the rich, and they blame all of society's problems on rich people. But do you see rich people forcibly, forcing people who live in poverty-stricken situations to have kids out of wedlock, to get pregnant, to use drugs, to refuse to report on criminals and gang members who are in their community destroying things. Do rich people go into other communities and force people to do things? Now, you can say that some rich people, through their actions, maybe, purchasing property and forcing poor people out of neighborhoods and things like that. Those are wrong things, or things that can happen in a capitalist society that we can weigh in on. We can debate the rightness of those actions. But we know that the reason there's a 78% out of wedlock birth rate in the Black community has zero to do with rich people, unless you're blaming the rich people who glorify that behavior in their music. So if you want to blame some rich people for what's going on in the Black community, maybe blame the people who set the culture in the Black community and glorify bad behavior and vilify good behavior. Oh, I think I'm stepping on some pretty big, wealthy, fancy, ringed up toes right now while I'm saying that stuff, right? That is what you're not supposed to say. You're never supposed to call out Jay-Z and Beyonce for glorifying behavior that they themselves don't engage in. Beyonce hasn't been married 5 or 6 times, and she doesn't have any kids out of wedlock. You notice that? And when push came to shove and her marriage was in trouble, she hunkered down and she worked on that marriage. She even wrote music about it and made the marital issues that she'd overcome into a vehicle for making more money. Whether or not you subscribe to the methods or the message that she puts out, the fact is she wanted to preserve her marriage so that her 3 children by the same man, by her husband, the only children she has, would grow up in an intact family. Is that what her music promotes? I don't think so. You could say it does. You could say it doesn't. I had a little catch in my throat there. So Bernie Sanders once posted to his Facebook page, "Let us wage a moral and political war against the billionaires and corporate leaders on Wall Street and elsewhere whose policies and greed are destroying the middle class of America." Now, in that statement, he's mimicking Karl Marx, who viewed history as a series of class struggles between rich and poor people and was an advocate of overthrowing the ruling class. Scripture does strongly warn the rich and powerful not to oppress the poor. Proverbs 14:31 says, "Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for his maker." But Sanders and other leftists, including Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Bill de Blasio, Amy Klobuchar, Pocahontas, any of them that you look at, they go far beyond decrying specific acts of injustice. They don't just say, this is an injustice because the people of Flint don't have clean water. They go further than that. They condemn entire classes of individuals for simply having more money than poor people. It's funny, they're careful to pick and choose the condemnation that they spread out so that it never touches themselves, because all of the people that I named off have nice amounts of money. They're well off. They have millions of dollars. And in a country like ours, where being a millionaire is actually not that big of a deal, there are hundreds of thousands of people in this country who are millionaires. But still they have cause to fix their mouths to criticize millionaires when they themselves are millionaires. Wouldn't it be nice to see Elizabeth Warren and these others, especially Hillary Clinton, where she has hundreds of millions of dollars, to take their money and say, I own 5 mansions. The Clintons are also multiple mansion owners. I'm going to sell 2 mansions and give that money to help refugees. I'm going to send money down to Mexico or El Salvador or Honduras, and I'm going to make sure that people down there have a place to live. I'm going to do something with my millions besides enriching myself and growing power. But they don't say that. They just blame you if you have millions. All right, we'll be back with more. Stay there.
Hope you enjoyed your meal. And I just want to say, he's lucky to have a brother like you.
Lucky? Caring for my brother is far from easy. But he's a part of me, like my arms and legs, so I'll be his. No time for tired. Nothing can disable this love. He needs me, but I'm the lucky one, even though I need help now and then.
If you're caring for a loved one, visit aarp.org/caregiving for care guides and community. Support for your strength. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Man, I love my kids so much. I once sat for 3 hours in the cold rain to watch her soccer team lose by 18 goals.
I love my kids so much, I once used a tube to suck snot out of her stuffed nose at 3 a.m.
You win.
Love your kids? Love them enough to make sure they're in the right car seat. From toddlers to tweens, visit nhtsa.gov/the right seat to find the right seat for their age and size. Keep them safe. Visit nhtsa.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Okay, man, this is your time. Maybe you didn't choose this, but you're here now. You're gonna go out there and be an all-star caregiver. Cook, clean, be there emotionally and physically. You gotta dig deeper. Drive them to physical therapy, doctor's appointments, because that's what caregivers do. Don't give up. Show the world that you're tougher than tough. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Colbert. Filling in for Smokey, because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Okay, forest animals, kids are coming to the forest, and it's up to us to make their visit a good one. Sparrow, have you practiced the most popular bird songs for the year?
Of course.
Catchy. I like it. River, how's the temperature?
It's a refreshing 52 degrees, man.
I love it. Turtle.
He's not here yet, man.
He's late every morning. Okay. Squirrel.
The forest has been preparing just for you. To learn more about cool things to do in the forest, visit discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
My mother was always very active and independent, and she was familiar with her neighborhood. But one day, she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual. She wasn't even really sure where she was at.
It's important for you to talk to someone about it. I felt so much better after my son told me, Mom, we'll figure it out.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Hey there. Welcome back to the program. So, again, we have so much information that goes against this idea that socialism has anything to do with Christianity or is compatible in any way with the society that we currently occupy and enjoy. And so finishing this off, Sanders, Hillary Clinton once said that U.S. economy required a toppling of the wealthiest 1%, of which she is one. That's how you know that they don't really believe this stuff, because they're talking about themselves. Rich people are not in and of themselves causing all of the problems that we see in America. We as individuals cause our own problems. I can think of 3 things right now that I have going on in my life that are my fault. I could blame Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama, but the truth, I know it. I know where those problems stem from, and the only solution can come from me making a change in my behavior, right? Here's the other thing. That's unfortunate, but it's the truth. And it's great for us to admit. I'll admit it for myself. Of my 3 problems that I'm thinking of right now, making a change doesn't mean tomorrow morning I wake up and those problems are gone. Guess what? I can make a change, and I'm actually making changes, but it's going to take time to get out of the situation that is presently, the situation. That means it's the same. It's similar for everyone who has a problem that they're dealing with. So the out-of-wedlock birth problem in the Black community isn't going away because we acknowledge it, but acknowledging it would go a long way in us saying, not only is this a problem, but we know where it stems from, and it's an individual problem. How do we stop it? How do we stem the tide? How do we change it? Well, people have to come to know that the behavior is wrong, and they have to want to turn away from it and decry it. And really, this is Christian radio here. You know where I'm coming from. You know what I'm about to say. If you're living like that, you're not close to Jesus. You are not living according to what the Bible dictates. When you say to yourself, I'm sick of this situation. I'm that sick of it. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to get over this. I'm going to end this. I'm going to live differently. In that moment, that is when you all of a sudden, it doesn't go away, but it gets a little easier to make steps in the right direction. And then the changes begin to happen. And, the Bible is rife with stories of people having revival, just people just living their lives and enjoying themselves and having, just the most amazing experiences because God stepped into the situation and made it possible for them to make changes. So the fifth reason that socialism is incompatible with Christianity is that it seeks to destroy marriage and family. A little known fact about socialism is that from the very beginning, socialism sought to destroy marriage and intact families. Professor at Grove City College, Paul Kenger, explained in his book, Takedown from Communists to Progressives, How the Left Has Sabotaged Marriage and Family. He explained that what socialism seeks at its most basic level is for the state to replace the family. And so in a lot of ways, when Bernie Sanders says things like socialism, democratic socialism, we already have it. We already have socialism in America. He's right. And when you look at the socialism that we do have, like the welfare situation in inner cities in America and in some rural areas where the government has taken over the role of the father and families are dependent upon the government in order to exist, you can see that socialism is already not just in place, but in full bloom because family situations are dependent upon the government as opposed to being dependent upon a father heading up the home and managing that situation. I'm not talking about him lording over the family or owning the wife and the kids, but being solely responsible for whether or not the people in that household eat. It's an amazing thing to see the difference between a man who doesn't care anything about whether or not his significant other, wife, whatever he's calling the woman who's had his kids, and those kids. Men who don't care about whether or not those people eat present themselves completely differently than men who do. You can spot a man who is absolutely determined to feed his wife and kids a mile away. You can see him coming. When he opens his mouth, you know the difference. There's something about him. It's not just special. It's not just unique. It is different than any man you encounter who's just out for himself. He's making babies all over the countryside, but he's not caring for any of them. And he's never, ever worried for 1 second whether or not they're going to eat. And really, does he have to? Does any man in America actually have to worry about whether or not a woman and the children he's made with that woman are going to eat when the welfare system says, don't worry about it, bro. We got it. The government will take care of your children and the woman who you made them with. So, before people get to blaming, it's all the MGTOW movement and the incels and all this other talk about how feminism is bad. And a lot of what we see out of feminism is horrible. But what's worse than that is to remove the desire for a man to care for women by caring for women and children by the government, which is you and me. And to not call that out? Come on now. So Bernie Sanders not only says that, hey, all the socialism we see already in American life is good and we should have more of it. But Bernie Sanders once called for a revolution in childcare and for the government to provide early childhood education, beginning with children as young as 6 weeks old. He's a proud supporter of gay marriage, and gay marriage is called by Professor Kenger communism's Trojan horse. Gay marriage is the final step to destroying the American family. Now, socialists hear these statements by Bernie Sanders as, ushering in a utopia, which, by the way, as long as human beings are present, a utopia cannot exist. But we as Christians know that this is the opposite of that. This is the destruction of everything that we know, all of the things that we can do that make life so good, so beautiful, so fruitful, so wonderful. There's nothing Christian about socialism. Jesus would never support it. We don't have to guess at that. We can look at his word. We can look at what God has said in his word about the way we are to live and treat each other and know for a fact, without a shadow of a doubt, that socialism has no place in our lives and that it is antithetical to the American family, which is the bedrock of what God has created. God created the American family, the human family, the intact traditional family, one man, one woman, joined in marriage with God, and the children that come from that union. He created it in the image of the Godhead. There is no other statement that can be as clear as the fact that God created marriage in the image of the Godhead. He formed it after his own formation. That is how we are to know that it is not to be trifled with or messed around with our human conventions, and that we are not to destroy it or attempt to modify it in an effort to try to make it what we want it to be or to improve upon it. It needs no improvement. It is what it is, and God made it that way. So, wow, that took a lot longer to get through than I had originally planned. But I do want to give you a little bit. Well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to push the discussion about why blacks should vote for Trump to tomorrow so I can cover it fully. And so that means the audio I have for you from Charles Barkley and Candace Owens, 2 audio bits that are just, you're going to want to hear these. They'll be on tomorrow's show. What I'm going to do today is get into a little bit more fun stuff. So we have this story over at Popular Mechanics about whether or not you can actually purchase a warplane. You're probably thinking to yourself, say what now? Well, this is actually a great story. So can you actually purchase a warplane? And first of all, I want to say, as someone who has advocated before for people who think that, you can't buy a tank. You can buy a tank. They're demilitarized. So that means the guns and all the stuff that make tanks deadly, all that stuff's been taken out. And these are at the end of their life. So they're very maintenance intensive. But for people who are hobbyists and you have a big barn and a lot of acres where you could store a tank, and you're able to get a permit and all that stuff, hey, it's a possibility. But what if you wanted an F-16? Well, guess what? If you have $8.5 million, you can have one. There's a company in Florida that's selling a 1980 F-16 for $8.5 million. Now, remember, if you bought an F-16, just to say you had $9 million laying around, because you're going to need you're going to need a hangar to store the aircraft in, and you're going to need the ability to have maintenance people working on it for you, unless you just happen to be a retired crew chief from the U.S. Air Force and your weapon system was the F-16. And then you need money for parts, because you're going to have to replace all kinds of different things on the plane. Now, you can buy your own warplane, because the planes are demilitarized and it is legal to do so. But the price that I just quoted you, the $8.5 million, doesn't include the price of maintenance, operation, and those two things can cost thousands of dollars per flight hour. Now, this plane that's for sale is actually an F-16 fighter jet manufactured in 1980, and it has 6,000 flight hours on it. So these planes' life cycle encompasses 8,000 flight hours. The aircraft is in storage in Palm Beach, Florida. And so it means it has about 2,000 flight hours left on it before it would need structural changes, repair, replacements, etc. Most of the details of the aircraft involved in the sale are blocked out and behind a paywall, so you have to kind of pay to get the information. But the limited amount of information that was offered is that the plane is from 1980. And that's pretty old for a warplane, but still a warplane. Like it is a legitimate F-16. Now, you might remember that I'm an Air Force veteran, and when I was on active duty, I was a data systems analyst, and my aircraft for the majority of the time I was on active duty was the F-15E, and then F-16s. We had F-16s at 85th Test. So the latest version of this plane, of the F-16, is the F-16V Block 70, which includes a new active electronically scanned array radar, conformal fuel tanks, digital data link, GPS, and an automatic system that prevents the aircraft from accidentally colliding with the ground. Woo, you gotta love that tech. And they include over here at Popular Mechanics this image, which notes that there are humps above the fuselage containing fuel tanks, a targeting pod under the air intake, and lots of missiles that come on this aircraft, or the aircraft is capable of carrying. And I can tell you these new lumps over the wings that hold fuel are basically an acknowledgement that sometimes they're out and they're in the air, if they're out doing exercises specifically, but they're meant to be out fighting, actually, going head to head with other aircraft of their type or doing bombing runs. And sometimes in the course of that, they can basically expend all of the fuel in their onboard tanks. They drop those tanks because they weigh about 1,500 pounds each. And in dropping them, that makes the aircraft lighter and more fuel efficient. But the way they get home once they drop those tanks is the fuel that's stored in the wings. And so these extra humps mean that they have extra fuel storage, meaning that they can be out there in the fight for longer. And that's kind of exciting when you think about that as a development, the difference between this current F-16 and an old one from 1980. Just a little bit of, extraneous information there. So the jet has actually been demilitarized. And what that means for an F-16 is that they stripped it of its 20 millimeter M61 Gatling gun. The nose mounted radar has been taken out. And most of the things that they would remove, top secret parts, stuff like that, are internal. So they've gone into the plane's insides and removed things that civilians can't see. And so it's for sale and it's functional, but it can't do the cool stuff that maybe, you might be imagining it could do, that it could totally do. So even though it's a 1980 plane, it's still got coolness that you can totally engage in. $8.5 million gets you this plane. Now, a lot, if you're wondering who else owns a civilian, who is a civilian and owns a demilitarized fighter jet, well, the person that I was most shocked to see is Michael Dorn. He played Lieutenant Worf on Star Trek: The Next Generation. He has owned several demilitarized fighter jets. He's owned a lot of different planes, actually. He's an accomplished pilot. He's flown with the kind of show fighter pilots where they go, the American Spirit or whatever they're called. He's flown with them. He used to own his own F-86 Sabre fighter. Yes. And I actually didn't put this story in the links, but I will. What I'll do is I'll put Michael Dorn, A Trek Worth Remembering. This is over at airportjournals.com. And it is a fascinating story of how this man took the time to learn how to be a pilot and eventually ended up flying fighter planes as a civilian for fun. All right, that's the show for today. It's so good to be back with you. I'll talk to you tomorrow. StacyOnTheRight.com.